Rain is affecting many of our water resources in different ways.
From lower water levels to wildlife and
rising water levels during the latest reading on the Missouri River.
A river that for centuries has been as reliable as the sunrise suddenly behaves like a living, capricious creature. One moment the Missouri River flows in its accustomed groove, carving familiar bends. The next, sections of its course seem to hesitate, stutter, or even shove themselves sideways. Something is stirred deep beneath the surface, something that defies the expectations of engineers, hydrologists, and river pilots alike. Along certain stretches, water levels swell without rain. In others, currents shift over hours in ways that make charts meaningless. And upstream, tributaries that should feed steadily instead seem to momentarily reverse, or at least pause, as if caught in hesitation. Observers who have lived along its banks their entire lives speak with uneasy voices. "I've never seen anything like this." The river, it seems, is deciding to redraw itself, and doing so without announcing a forecast. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. It begins with anomalous readings at gauging stations. Instruments record flows exceeding forecasts by several dozen percent. Then, in stretches known for their sluggishness, currents pulse, surging forward in bursts when nothing upstream would justify the rush. In one case, a stretch 6 miles long exhibited a sudden downstream acceleration, so pronounced that panels on a monitoring buoy were ripped loose. Boats moored to side piers began drifting unexpectedly, straining anchor chains. The images came in, turbid water swirling with debris, eddies forming where the channel should have been calm. Agencies scrambled to issue alerts, but by then the river has already negotiated its own new path. At first glance, one might suspect heavy rains upstream or dam releases gone wrong, the usual suspects for sudden fluctuations in river behavior. But the twist is that none of those forces seem to have shifted in any meaningful way. Reservoir releases remain consistent, precipitation in the watershed is within seasonal norms, and tributaries show no signs of sudden surges. Yet the main stem of the Missouri responds as if channels have rearranged themselves overnight. On satellite images, sections of formerly distinct meanders begin to blur. Banks where water should not stray are inundated as if the river has breached old foresights. In places, the shoreline recedes while new shallow outliers emerge on the opposite bank. Islands that were once stable emerge partially submerged, their edges crumbling. Senior hydrologists convene late at night over grainy thermal maps, trying to reconcile flow vectors that simply make no sense. In one illustrative event, a narrow cutoff channel dormant for decades suddenly reactivated. A sidearm that had become a marshy backwater saw current swirled through it, siphoning off part of the main flow. In that zone, the water table behind old levees buckled, saturating old embankments and causing localized seepage. Sediment-laden flows visibly carved new banks, and the main channel thinned as the load redistributed. Mariners navigating through that area reported ghost currents, eddies that tugged unpredictably. Local river pilots, accustomed to reading the subtle signs of pebbles, riffles, and eddies, found the new patterns unintelligible. One captain radioed in that a bend that used to drift the vessel gently to starboard was now threatening to shove it toward the bank, an inversion of decades of experience. What could prompt such an audacious reshuffling? Some point to subsurface shifts, perhaps channel bed failures, breakthroughs in subsurface conduits, or an underground collapse that opens a siphon-like effect. In other places, historical oxbows long disconnected might be re-engaging, offering a shortcut path the river evidently finds more efficient under certain conditions. The principle is simple. Water always seeks the path of least resistance, and if some hidden undercut fails, the river's logic changes. What once took hours for gradual bank erosion now happens invisibly, behind the scenes, until everything above responds in panic. Throughout the lengths of the Missouri, sediment plays a starring role. When flow deviates, suspended sediments settle in unaccustomed places. Bars emerge in mid-channel, disrupting older flow lines. Those bars further deflect currents, reinforcing the novel patterns. The process can cascade. An eddy forms. A swirl pushes more water one way. Sediment drops. A new minibar forms. And suddenly, the river is on a different course. Because much of the Missouri today is constrained by levees, wing dams, and engineered banks, its freedom to roam is reduced, but not eliminated. Where constraints are weakest, in floodplain reconnections, in backups, In side channels, the river sometimes rebels, reclaiming ground. In maps from before the shift, the river's course had been remarkably stable over recent years, largely shaped by decades of human engineering. Dams, cutoffs, channelization efforts, and bank repression. Those interventions made the river more predictable, tamed its wandering impulses, and traded some of its natural dynamism for navigational reliability. But what we are now witnessing suggests that human constraints have been overwhelmed, momentarily at least, by the river's underlying geomorphic drive. The implications of this shifted flow go deep. For navigation, charts become obsolete almost overnight. Barges may run aground in zones previously safe, scour may undercut levees unexpectedly, and low-lying infrastructure such as docks, piers, levee tows, and pumping stations find themselves suddenly misaligned with the river's pressure. Agricultural lands abutting the river risk new breaches or seepage. Waterside communities could wake to submerged fields or washed-out road shoulders. The river's unpredictable behavior undermines the very interface between humans and the river we believe to have mastered. From an ecological perspective, the change is profound. Riparian zones, the transitional fringe between water and land, may be inundated in areas long dry, drowning species adapted to occasional flooding. Conversely, zones that had become wetlands might dry as flow abandons them. Fish migrations, especially during spawning windows, may be disoriented. Species that adapted to the old hydrodynamics find themselves in unfamiliar currents or water depths. Invasive species might exploit novel niches exposed by sediment redistribution. Birding habitats, amphibian pools, aquatic plants, all feel the ripple of dynamic change. Scientifically, this event challenges fundamental assumptions about river stability. Rivers are often modeled as evolving gradually, with interventions allowing engineers to assume relative stationarity in behavior over decades. But if sudden, unanticipated shifts can occur, perhaps via hidden breaks or subsurface failure, then the margin of error in flood forecasting, infrastructure design, and river management becomes much thinner. Models of bank erosion, levee resilience, channel migration, and floodplain connectivity will need reassessment to include abrupt shifts as real possibilities, not mere anomalies. The temporal aspect is especially disconcerting. The river does not issue warnings. Pressure sensors pick up nothing until flows are already changing. Flow gauges downstream might note excess discharge, but the source channel dynamics may have already been altered. The response time for human systems is too slow to meaningfully counter a self-reorganizing fluvial system. In effect, the Missouri is asserting that some threshold, perhaps hydraulic, sedimentary, or structural, has been crossed, triggering a feedback loop beyond human control in the short term. Consider the potential for chain reactions. A channel shift upstream might force greater flows into a secondary branch. That branch over time might erode its banks, scouring deeper and rerouting even further. Over months, entire reaches might respond, destabilizing levees far downstream. Where multiple tributaries join, competition for flow can become volatile. One day's aberration might propagate over weeks across hundreds of river miles. Strategists must now think not just of local remedies, but of cascade risk, a single micro-event triggering waves of change. It also forces a reconsideration of the interface between engineered control and natural dynamics. Levees, wing dams, cutoffs, revetments, all were built to pin the river where we wanted it. But this event highlights that the river retains a memory and a will. When constraints fail, it seeks new paths. In designing resilient systems, planners may need to incorporate breachable zones, sacrificial corridors, or semi-dynamic planning that anticipates such surprises. The notion of a fixed river, entirely domesticated, begins to seem hubristic. Human trust in data, too, will be tested. If gauging stations, hydrological models, and flood risk maps can become obsolete in a single night, then the confidence in early warning systems must accommodate greater uncertainty margins. Insurance systems tied to flood maps may become unmoored. Communities previously deemed safe may wake into new danger zones. Emergency response systems, river patrols, navigation guidelines, all may need revision under this new reality. Some remote geologists point to hidden triggers, bedrock failures, subsurface karsts, or collapse of glacial legacy sediments. Others look to climate change not via precipitation, but through temperature, permafrost thawing in upper watersheds, changes in freeze-thaw cycles altering soil strength and subsurface moisture, perhaps even triggering slumping near banks. In such a view, the Missouri might be only one among many rivers globally that might begin to exhibit sudden shifts as environmental thresholds approach tipping points. Yet the anomaly might also be internal, not only external forcing. Rivers under heavy sediment loading with fluctuating flows, constrained banks, and aging infrastructure may internally approach metastable states. A small perturbation, a bank failure, a root-lodged void collapse might act as the spark that triggers a new equilibrium. In such dynamic systems, the transition is abrupt rather than gradual. The river's decision to reorganize can emerge from cumulative stress, not just external events. Across the scientific community, the event fuels an urgent quest. Locate where the river is shifting, map dynamic susceptibilities, and find early precursors. Are there microseismic signatures as subsurface conduits shift? Can sonar mapping detect slight undercuts before flows respond? Could sediment transport anomalies act as a warning? Could remote satellite INSAR or topographic changes reveal nascent bank slivers about to give way? The race is on to find predictive signals before the next shift. River managers must now grapple with the philosophical dilemma of control versus accommodation. Do we double down on engineering responses, erecting stronger levees, dredging new channels? Or do we adopt a more flexible strategy? Allow the river to shift within controlled corridors, strategically sacrificial zones, and adapt infrastructure to river dynamism. The latter involves humility, accepting that the river may sometimes win, that we may need to retreat, rezone, rebuild differently. But the former risks a never-ending battle against nature's restlessness. Also, the event invites comparisons with other rivers known for abrupt course changes, albeit on smaller scales or in geologic time. In regions where rivers suddenly avulse into abandoned channels, cut new bends, or barrel across floodplains in a single season, such behavior has been recorded, but rarely on large engineered rivers like the Missouri in real time. The fact that such a shift is happening now, in a river heavily managed and monitored, is what stirs both alarm and fascination. What still puzzles many is the trigger. Was it a bank collapse hidden underwater, a scour hole exposing weaker strata, or slow failure of a submerged root network? Could the accumulation of silt and debris upstream have stressed side channels until they broke through? Did a tributary experience a subterranean shift that propagated its effects into the main stem? Was there a seismic tremor too minor to register in regional records but potent enough to unsettle subsurface support? Each of these remains speculative until ground surveys, sonar profiling, and subsurface imaging conclude. But in those forthcoming studies lies the key, not just to understand this event, but to anticipate future ones. Communities upstream sense the danger. Levees built centuries ago may now be vulnerable where they once felt invulnerable. Engineers inspect channels for scour protection, and tow erosion. Dredging decisions must suddenly consider unpredictability, not just sediment accumulation. Navigation authorities must keep vessels off suspect reaches. Agricultural planners may reclassify flood zones. But fundamentally, humans must watch rather than dictate, adapt rather than permanently prescribe. As dusk falls along the river, locals sometimes stand on high bluffs, watching currents curl into strange new paths. They see eddies forming where there were none, islands half submerged, banks collapsing into churning water. Those who know the Missouri's moods, fishermen, river guides, old captains, speak quietly now of a restless river as though it dreams in channel arcs and sediment pulses. It is a living script of water and earth interacting, and we are witnessing one of its sudden rewrites. The Missouri River now gives a warning in its silence. Beneath the placid waters, unseen forces shift the ground, open passages, and reforge the map. Our devices, our charts, our confidence in control, all are vulnerable when a mighty river decides to shift. The challenge now is not to tame every surprise, but to live in dialogue with a river that remembers its ancient freedom. In the following days after the initial reports of the Missouri River's strange realignment, scientists, engineers, and local observers continued to collect evidence that something far deeper was occurring beneath the surface. The phenomenon wasn't a simple meander correction or erosion event. It was an act of geological reconfiguration unfolding in real time. While no single cause could be isolated, sensors began picking up subtle gravitational and pressure anomalies across the riverbed, suggesting that entire sections of sediment-laden substrate were compacting or shifting laterally. It was as though the ground beneath the river had loosened its grip, allowing the current to dictate a new geometry. The Missouri, long thought to be mastered through locks, dams, and dredge channels, was slipping back into a wilder rhythm, one born from ancient forces that no spreadsheet could anticipate. Survey teams moving along the riverbanks noted unsettling patterns. New sandbars emerging overnight, whirlpools forming where the channel was once placid, and side tributaries showing reverse turbulence. At one monitoring site near St. Joseph, the river's depth dropped by nearly 4 feet in less than 6 hours, without a corresponding change upstream. That kind of behavior is almost unheard of in such a large river system. It indicated not only a redistribution of flow, but also a possible rearrangement of the subsurface bedload, meaning that the river might have created new conduits or internal channels beneath the sediment. This unseen architecture, once established, could fundamentally redirect future flows even if the surface appeared stable. The scale of such a transformation forces observers to think about the river not as a boundary between land and water, but as an evolving organism, a dynamic force capable of rewriting geography. That concept reshapes the way we interpret maps and ownership. Fences, property lines, and levees were drawn assuming the river's permanence, but if it has entered a period of spontaneous reorganization, those constructs lose their meaning. Farmers who have worked the same plots for generations might now see the river's edge marching closer or pulling away, altering soil moisture, nutrient distribution, and access to irrigation. For local ecosystems, such transitions can create chaotic abundance and loss at once, new wetlands forming as others dry, fish species migrating into unexpected zones, and vegetation scrambling to adapt to shifting saturation levels. The Missouri's unpredictable behavior also raises subtle but important questions about feedback loops in large river systems. When a river shifts course suddenly, the change in hydraulic pressure against surrounding soils can set off chain reactions, minor landslides, slumping, or seepage into aquifers that were once sealed. If underground flows start aligning differently, groundwater reserves might replenish unevenly, changing the chemistry of wells and even local climate humidity patterns. In essence, a single fluvial event could echo upward through the entire environmental matrix of the Midwest, influencing water management strategies hundreds of miles away. These interconnections are seldom visible to the public eye, but they are precisely what keep hydrologists awake at night. From a cultural and psychological perspective, the sudden shift strikes at something older than science: humanity's instinctive awe of untamed water. For centuries, the Missouri has symbolized progress, frontier, and control, a highway for exploration, trade, and power. Now that same river reminds everyone that control is conditional. The notion that we can freeze nature into compliance feels fragile when one of the continent's great arteries begins to rewrite its pulse without a whisper of warning. Standing by the water's edge, one realizes how thin the boundary truly is between mastery and surrender, between the planned world of engineering and the raw impulse of earth and water to reclaim their form. The Missouri, ever restless, seems to be reminding us that beneath the calm surface of civilization, the planet still moves according to its own deep will. Further upstream, near the confluence zones where the Missouri's tributaries feed into its broad corridor, researchers began detecting curious microcurrents, fine ribbon-like flows traveling in directions perpendicular to the main current. These microcurrents, almost invisible to the naked eye, were captured through laser Doppler sensors and drone-based infrared imaging. They hinted at layered motion within the river, with deeper strata of water gliding one way while the upper surface drifted another. This complex internal shearing indicated that the river's equilibrium was not only spatially, but vertically disturbed. Such vertical inversions, where dense sediment-laden water pushes beneath clearer, lighter layers, could trigger intermittent surges or eddies far downstream. In essence, the river was now flowing in multiple dimensions, as if it had forgotten the single obedient path carved by human constraint. Teams stationed at temporary camps along the banks described strange acoustic phenomena as well. During the night, when the wind quieted, the river emitted a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the ground, an almost mechanical rhythm rising from below. Instruments later confirmed that the frequency correlated with oscillations in subsurface flow velocity, a resonance produced by water forcing its way through compacted layers of sand and silt. The river was literally singing its tension into the landscape, a deep reminder of the energies hidden beneath stillness. Even as scientists documented every anomaly, there was a shared, silent recognition that the Missouri had crossed an invisible threshold. What had once been an instrument of transport and irrigation was now asserting its autonomy. The flow shift wasn't a mere deviation, but a transformation. A declaration that the river's agency had returned. Those who stood along its edge understood they were witnessing not an event with a clear cause or conclusion, but the awakening of an ancient, moving power, remembering its own depth. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us. What are your thoughts on the Missouri River's sudden shift in flow direction? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.